She had 3 days before the boarding house turned her out, and nowhere in Caldwell County willing to take a widow without coin or kin. The man who sent the letter had not signed it with warmth, only need, a ranch address, and a single question that told her everything about how he saw her before she arrived. This is not a story about a woman who answered small and stayed small. It is a story about two people who had each already paid the full price of surviving alone, and what happened when they were finally forced to stop. The pen had dried before she finished reading the letter the second time. Nora Calloway sat at the narrow table in Mrs. Birch's boarding house, the paper held flat against the wood by 2 fingers, as though it might escape her if she loosened her grip. Outside, the October wind came off the plains in long, low gusts that rattled the single-pane window above the wash basin. The room smelled of lye soap and old wood smoke. The cold in the floorboards had long since worked its way through the soles of her boots. 3 days. Mrs. Birch had said it plainly at breakfast, not unkindly, but without apology. 3 days, Mrs. Calloway, and then I'll need the room for a paying guest. Nora had thanked her and carried her coffee to the table and read the letter again. It had come through the Reverend, as so many arrangements did in Harrow. Reverend Tillis had brought it to the boarding house himself, turning his hat in his hands with the particular discomfort of a man delivering news he considered beneath him. The rancher had written to the Reverend. The rancher needed a woman who could manage a household. The rancher was not looking for courtship. He was looking for an arrangement, legal and documented, without sentiment attached. The Reverend had called it an opportunity. Nora had read the word twice and felt the quiet insult of it settle into her chest alongside everything else she was carrying. Her husband, Thomas, had been dead 14 months. The farm they had worked together for 6 years now belonged to Thomas's brother, who had produced a document she had no money to contest and no lawyer willing to touch without a retainer she did not have. She had come to Harrow with the contents of one trunk and the $31 she had sewn into the hem of her second skirt. The money was gone. The trunk remained. The 3 days were running. She folded the letter and placed it inside her skirt pocket and sat for a long moment with her hands in her lap. The arrangement was legal. That was what the Reverend had said. A documented marriage, a house, a roof. And the rancher's letter had asked one question at the bottom, as though the answer were the only thing that mattered. And everything else, her history, her mind, her capacity, could be determined afterward. Can you wash? Nora had looked at that line for a long time. She had clerked law for her father from the age of 12. She had managed the full accounts of a working farm for 6 years. She had nursed 2 horses through Founder, argued a boundary dispute before a county magistrate on Thomas's behalf, and kept a household running through 2 drought summers on a fraction of what it required. Can you wash? She wrote back the same afternoon. 1 line. Better than you have thought to ask. She did not regret it. The wagon came for her 2 mornings later, driven by a hired hand named Cal, who did not speak beyond the necessary and handed her up without ceremony. The plains stretched wide and pale under a white sky. Nora watched the town of Harrow shrink behind her and did not let herself look back more than once. The Aldridge Ranch announced itself at a distance. She saw the fence line first, cedar posts, recently repaired in stretches, older in others, which told her something about where the money had been going and where it had stopped. The barn was large and sound. The house was a different story. 2 windows on the east side had been reglazed with oilskin where the glass was gone. The porch railing was missing an entire section. The kitchen garden had gone to hard ground, unharvested and unturned, the remnants of a summer's failed effort still visible in the dead stalks. A dying operation held together by desperation and pride. She had read that in the posture of the fence line before she ever set foot in the yard. The man standing at the top of the porch steps was tall and weather-cut, somewhere in his mid-30s, with the kind of stillness that comes not from calm, but from long practice controlling what showed on a face. He wore his coat open despite the cold. His eyes moved across her once quickly, taking inventory. He did not offer his hand. She did not wait for him. She stepped down from the wagon without Cal's assistance and walked across the yard and stopped at the base of the porch steps and looked up at him with her hands quiet at her sides. Mr. Aldridge. Mrs. Calloway. A pause. Wind pulled a strand of her dark hair loose and she did not move to fix it. Reverend Tillis says the paperwork is in order, she said. It is. Then I would like to see the kitchen before we proceed. Something moved across his face, not quite surprise, not quite the absence of it. He turned without a word and held the door. The kitchen was cold and understocked but structurally sound. There was a good iron stove, a deep basin sink, and a window that faced east for morning light. The larder held dried beans, salt pork, 2 jars of preserves that had likely been there since the previous summer, and a sack of flour with weevils working their way through the lower third. Nora noted all of it in the time it took her to cross the room and back. The flour will need replacing, she said, and the larder needs a proper accounting before I can tell you what the household requires each week. You'll have a household allowance, he said from the doorway. Reasonable. I'll need it in writing. His eyes held on her for a moment. You came here with conditions. I came here with sense, she said, which is what the arrangement requires. I believe your letter made clear what you expected. A silence. The iron stove ticked in the cold. The Reverend will be here at 10 tomorrow, Aldrich said. The ceremony takes a quarter hour. After that, the ranch is yours to manage as you see fit, so long as the hands are fed and the accounts don't bleed further. And your expectations beyond that? I don't have any. It was said without cruelty and without invitation, a flat statement of fact from a man who had stopped expecting things from people some time ago. Nora heard it clearly. Then we understand each other, she said. She unpacked her trunk that evening in the small room off the east hall, her room, separate and plainly established without discussion. The house around her settled into its nighttime sounds, beams contracting in the cold, wind finding the gaps in the oilskin windows, the distant sound of cattle somewhere beyond the barn. She did not sleep for some time. She lay with her hands folded on her chest and looked at the dark ceiling and thought not of what she had given up to be here, but of the weevils in the flour and the dead garden and the oilskin windows, and what could be done with each one in turn. The ceremony the following morning lasted 12 minutes. Holt Aldridge stood beside her in the cold parlor with his hat in his hands and his jaw set, and signed his name without looking at her. She signed her name steadily and folded her copy and placed it in her coat pocket with the same deliberateness she had given the letter 2 days before. No one threw rice. No one was there, too. The Reverend left. Holt went to the barn. Nora went to the kitchen. And that is where it happened. She'd been there perhaps 20 minutes, pulling the larder apart and making notes, when she heard his boots on the floor behind her. She turned to find him in the doorway with his arms crossed and his expression carrying the particular blankness of a man who has just remembered something he intended to ask and is uncertain how it will land. "Can you wash?" he said. The question sat in the warm kitchen air between them. She looked at him steadily. He was watching her with the careful attention of a man who had been disappointed before and was bracing, already, for the shape of the next disappointment. She set her pen down on the table. "I can wash," she said. "I can also keep a full set of accounts, argue a loan instrument, treat a horse with the founder, turn a kitchen garden for winter cover, and identify 3 errors in the payment schedule your bank has been running on this property for the past 9 months. She kept her voice level and her hands still at her sides. "I answered your letter honestly. I'm telling you now so we do not waste each other's time pretending I am something smaller than what I am." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the ones before it. He looked at her for a long moment, not with the quick inventory expression he had used in the yard, but with the slower attention of a man recalculating something he thought he had already measured. His arms uncrossed. He said nothing. He turned and went back to the barn. But he had left the door open behind him, and that, she thought, returning to her pen and her larder list, was something. By noon she had produced a full accounting on 2 sheets of paper from her trunk, every item in stock, estimated value, projected shortfall by month's end, and a separate column for what could be recouped by selling the unused tack she had noted in the barn's south corner. She left the papers on the kitchen table where he would find them. He found them that evening when he came in for supper, standing at the table in his coat reading them while she stood at the iron stove. The heat off the burner was substantial after the long cold of the day, and she felt it in her face and hands as she worked the salt pork in the pan. "You priced the tack," he said. 3 of those saddles haven't been used in at least a season. The leather will go if they sit through another winter. The mercantile in Harrow will take them." Another silence. The smell of salt pork and wood smoke filled the kitchen. "How do you know what the mercantile will take?" "Because I went to Harrow with Thomas for 6 years and kept the accounts." She turned and set the plate on the table. "I also know the bank holds the second note on this land and that payments have been irregular for the past 3 quarters. If you have documents relating to that, I would like to look at them." He sat down slowly. "Who told you about the note?" "No one. The condition of the property told me." He looked at the plate, and then at her, and then at the papers beside the plate. He picked up the fork. "The documents are in the study," he said. She took that as permission. 3 days passed. Nora moved through the house and the kitchen and the yard with the efficiency of a woman who had been solving practical problems her entire life and needed no guidance to continue. She restocked the larder, turned the kitchen garden for winter cover, and persuaded Cal, through the simple logic of presenting him with a hot midday meal for the first time in apparent months, to reglaze the east windows before the first hard freeze. By the 4th morning, the ranch hands ate together at a proper hour and left their plates scraped clean. She had learned their names: Cal, who drove the wagon, a young man named Percy with a broken finger, healed wrong, and an older hand they called Dobb, who watched her with the cautious attention of a man accustomed to disappointment. Holt watched her too. She noticed that. He had a habit of appearing in doorways at odd hours, not stepping in, simply standing there with his arms crossed as though confirming something he had not yet confirmed. On the 5th morning, she found him at the barn before first light, working the leg of one of the mares who had come up lame. He was crouched in the straw with the horse's hoof between his knees, working by lantern light, his breath making small clouds in the dark. The straw was warm beneath the smell of cold outside air and animal heat, that particular barn smell, layered and alive, that she had grown up with and not smelled since the farm. He did not hear her come in. She watched him for a moment, the care in his hands, the patience of it, the way the mare had gone entirely still under his attention, and then she crossed to the opposite stall and picked up the liniment tin from the shelf where she had moved it 2 days ago to the place she would have put it if she were the one tending a lame horse. She held it out without speaking. He looked up. Something crossed his expression, not surprise exactly, but the recognition of something he had not been prepared for. He took the tin. "You moved this. I reorganized the shelf. Everything was in the order it arrived, not the order it gets used." He looked at the tin and back at her. "You know liniment work. Thomas kept horses. One foundered 2 winters running. I learned what to do." He turned back to the mare's leg and began working the liniment in with slow, practiced strokes. Nora crouched at a distance and held the lantern at the angle that would give him the best light without being asked. After a while he said, without looking up, "The bank has sent a man. Coming end of the month." "I know," she said. "I read the correspondence." "And?" "I think I can help you argue the payment schedule. There are inconsistencies in the original note agreement that the bank may prefer not to have examined in detail." She kept her voice level. "I would need a day with the full ledger." The lantern light moved across his face as he worked. He was quiet for a long time. "You'd have done this even without the arrangement," he said. It was not quite a question. "I'd do what needs doing," she said, "whether anyone is watching or not. This is Dusty Vows, where stories like hers live. Women who were underestimated, men who did not yet know what they were missing. If you want the next story the moment it arrives, subscribe now. Then, back to the ranch." She spent that full day with the ledger and did not emerge from the study until supper, when she placed a 4-page summary on the table beside his plate, with columns marked in red where the bank had applied interest inconsistently with the original terms. Holt read it in the silence of the kitchen while she served. He read it twice. He set it down with care, the way a man handles something he does not want to damage. "Where did you learn this?" he asked. "My father was a solicitor," she said. "I clerked for him from the time I was 12 until I married." He looked up at her. "You didn't say that in your letter." "You didn't ask what I knew," she said. "You asked if I could wash." The thing that happened to his face then was not quite a smile, but it was as close as she had seen, and she recognized it for what it was, the involuntary expression of a man catching himself before he shows something he is not ready to show. He looked back down at the papers, and she turned back to the stove and neither of them said anything more. But the quality of the silence in the room had changed. It was Dobb who named it, the way people on the outside of a thing so often can. He said it to Percy in the yard on the 8th morning, not knowing Nora was on the other side of the fence line taking washing from the line. His voice carried plainly in the dry, cold air. She's holding this place together with 2 hands, and nobody's even thanked her for it. Percy's answer was quieter, but she caught the shape of it. He doesn't know how yet. She took down the last of the washing and carried it inside, and did not let herself dwell on it. Mrs. Alander from the neighboring spread came by that same afternoon, a wide, solid woman of 60 who arrived with a jar of preserved plum, and the directness of someone who had spent enough years on the frontier to see through pretense entirely. She sat at the kitchen table and watched Nora work and said, "He ran off the last 2 women the agency sent before they'd been here a week." "I wasn't sent by an agency," Nora said. "No," Mrs. Olander said. "That is apparent." She turned the jar of plum in her hands. "He's not a bad man. He's a frightened one. His father lost this land and got it back and lost it again, and Holt has been holding what's left since he was 19. He doesn't know how to let anyone stand beside him." "He doesn't need to let me," Nora said. "I stand where I stand." Mrs. Alander looked at her with something close to satisfaction. "Yes," she said quietly. "I can see that." She was gone before Holt returned from the far pasture. That evening, Nora was at the kitchen table after supper when she heard the wagon come in too fast. Then voices, Cal's, tight and clipped, and another she did not recognize. She was in the doorway before Holt reached the porch. The man in the yard was Gerald Fitch. She knew the name from the bank correspondence, not a bank representative, but a private creditor. A man who held a 3rd lien on the northeast pasture land that Holt's father had taken and never disclosed to his son. Fitch was built narrow and confident, the way men are who have never needed physical force because the law had always been willing to do their work for them. He was holding a folded paper and smiling. "I have a 30-day notice," he said to Holt, "signed by Judge Haverfield. You vacate the northeast quarter or the whole note accelerates." Holt's face had gone to stone. "That pasture isn't encumbered. Your father would disagree," Fitch said. "I have the documentation." Nora stepped forward. "May I see it?" Both men looked at her. Fitch's smile did not move. "Mrs. Aldrich, this is a business matter between." "My name is on the deed," she said, "which makes me a party to any instrument affecting this property." "May I see it?" Fitch held the paper out with the condescension of a man who expects to be ignored. She took it and read it, standing in the cold yard with Cal's lantern throwing uneven light across the page. She read it twice. She handed it back. "This notice is defective," she said. Fitch's smile thinned. "Excuse me. The acceleration clause requires written demand be served to both parties of record. My name was added to the deed 11 days ago. You served only one party. The notice is procedurally defective, and the 30-day period has not legally begun." She folded her hands in front of her. "You're welcome to have your lawyer verify that. I believe you will find I am correct." The yard was very quiet. Fitch looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a man recalculating. "I'll be back," he said. "When you are," Nora said, "bring properly served documentation." He left. Cal let out a low breath and moved toward the barn. Percy, who had been standing near the fence, disappeared around the corner with something that looked like a grin. Holt was standing 2 feet from her in the cold yard. She could feel the heat radiating off him, the controlled heat of a man who had been bracing for a blow and was still bracing even after it had not landed. Nora. Just that. Her name, the first time he had used it, said the way a man says a word he has been carrying in his chest without knowing it. They both heard it. "Tell me, did you feel that shift, or was it only her? Leave your answer in the comments. I read everyone. Now, back to the story." She did not answer immediately. The silence between them was not empty. "The defect buys us time," she said, "but Fitch will serve proper notice. We have perhaps 3 weeks before the legal clock runs. Can we fight it?" "I believe so. There are grounds to argue the original lien was undisclosed to you at transfer, which would constitute a material defect in your father's estate. If we can establish that you had no knowledge—" "I didn't. Then we have an argument." She looked up at him. "But I need the original transfer documents and the estate filing." They'll be in the county records office in Millhaven. That's a day's ride. I know. He was quiet. The wind carried the smell of cold earth and a distant change in the weather, that particular heaviness before plains rain, still hours away but building. He was looking at her with eyes that were not, she had come to understand, flat at all. They were careful. There was a great deal happening behind them. He had simply learned, across a long time and at real cost, not to let it show. "I'll take you," he said. They left before dawn. The road to Millhaven ran east across open country, the plains wide and colorless in the early light, the wagon moving at a steady pace. They did not speak for the first hour, which was not uncomfortable. The silence between them had changed quality again, less like a wall and more like shared ground. At some point the sun came fully up and the plains went gold-brown, and a hawk moved across the sky ahead of them without effort. "Your father," he said, without preamble. "What about him?" "The solicitor. He taught you the law. He taught me to read documents carefully," she said, "and to trust what is written over what is said." He held the reins and did not answer for a time. "Your father," she said, "the hidden lien. You found out after he died. 3 months later. That's when the bank irregularities started. I was trying to cover it without—" He stopped, started again. "I didn't want the hands to know how bad it was." "They knew," she said, not unkindly. He looked straight ahead at the road. She watched his jaw work once. "You can't protect people by keeping them in the dark," she said. "You can only protect them by solving the problem." He did not answer, but something in his shoulders lowered by a fraction, the way a man looks when he sets down a weight he had stopped noticing he was carrying. They reached Millhaven by mid-morning. The county records office was a single room behind the courthouse, managed by a clerk named Hoskins, who had the pinched proprietary air of a man who considered public documents his personal property. He looked at Nora, then at Holt, then back at Nora, waiting for her to direct herself through the man beside her and explain herself at a remove. She addressed Hoskins directly. "I need the transfer documents for the Aldridge land grant, the estate filing from '71, and any recorded lien instruments attached to the Northeast Quarter." She did not look at him while she worked. She pulled the documents and sat at the clerk's narrow table for 2 hours with her pen moving steadily, the scratch of it the only sound in the cold room. Holt came and stood closer after a while, reading over her shoulder in silence, and she let him. She found what she needed in the estate filing. A notation, small, easily overlooked, clearly intended to be overlooked, in the margin of page 7, handwriting that did not match the rest of the document. "Here," she said. He leaned in and looked over her shoulder. He was close enough that she felt the warmth of him against the chill that had come off the road. She pointed at the notation without moving. "This addendum was added after the filing date. The ink is different, and the handwriting is different. Someone altered the document after the fact to insert the lien. That is fraud." He was very still. "Can you prove it?" "Not alone. But a judge with any integrity, looking at this ink beside the original, will have questions." She looked up at him. He was close. His eyes were on the document, but she felt the moment his attention shifted to her face. "Fitch forged a lien that didn't exist. When he returns with proper service, we file for fraud before he can accelerate anything." He straightened slowly. He was looking at her now, directly, with something in his expression she had not seen from him before, not gratitude exactly, but something more fundamental. The look of a man who's been holding something alone for years and has just recognized another person's hands on the other side of it. "I owe you more than the arrangement covers," he said quietly. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "I did this because failing serves neither of us." Nora, her name again, the second time. Heavier now, more deliberate. Both of them registered it. "That isn't entirely true anymore, is it?" She held his gaze. "No," she said, "it isn't." They rode back in the late afternoon light, the sky clearing to a deep autumn blue above the plains. She had copied the critical page in full and tucked the notebook deep in her coat pocket. The threat still had teeth. Fitch would return. The legal argument would need to be made formally. The banknote still required resolution. But the shape of it had changed. It was a problem with a solution, which was entirely different from a problem with none. She was thinking this when Holt said, without preamble, "My father told me the ranch would break me. She looked at him. His voice carried the particular evenness of something said long after the hurt of it had been settled into a bare fact. Not to warn me. To see if it would. He was that kind of man. Did it? She asked. Not yet, he said. No, she agreed. Not yet. The road ran straight and the light went gold across the dead grass on either side, and a meadowlark, late in the season, improbable, called once from somewhere in the distance, and then was gone. She had not heard a meadowlark since she left the farm. The sound moved through her chest like something she had not been braced for. She did not say that. She sat with it and let the road unspool ahead of them, and thought that this was what it meant, perhaps, to begin, not with fanfare, but with a meadowlark in October on a flat road, both of you carrying your histories quietly and not asking each other to set them down. The ranch came into view at dusk. The lantern in the barn window was lit. The smoke from the kitchen chimney rose straight in the still evening air. Holt stopped the wagon at the yard gate and did not immediately climb down. "There is something I want to say," he said. She waited. "When I sent that letter, I wrote what I needed, not what I had any right to expect." He kept his eyes on the fence line, on the barn light. "You came here with 3 days left in a trunk and your father's law in your head, and you haven't asked for anything but space to work. That is what I needed," she said. "I know." He turned and looked at her directly, and there was no careful management in his face now. It had been set aside entirely. "I'm asking now whether you are willing to stay. Not because of the arrangement, because of what this has become." The cold was sharp. The sky overhead had gone indigo at the edges. Somewhere across the pasture, one of the cattle lowed low and slow. Nora sat with her hands in her lap and felt the weight of every day of the past 2 weeks and the 14 months before that and the 6 years before that. And she thought about what it cost a proud man to say those words plainly, without deflection, with no structure around them to hide behind. "Yes," she said. He offered his hand to help her down from the wagon. She took it. His grip was firm and warm, and he did not let go immediately when her feet found the ground, and neither did she. Mrs. Olander came by 3 days later and sat at the kitchen table and watched them move around each other with the easy rhythm of people who have stopped pretending distance, and she said nothing at all. She simply drank her coffee and smiled at the table. Before she left, she paused at the door and looked at Nora with something that was not sentiment, but was close to its most honest form. "He came into the mercantile last Tuesday," she said, "and bought flour without being asked. In 14 months, he has not once bought anything for this kitchen that was not strictly for himself." Nora handed her back the jar of plum, refilled. "Tell no one," she said. "He would hate it." Mrs. Olander laughed, a short, dry sound like a barn board settling, and went. On the front porch that evening, after supper, after the hands had gone to the bunkhouse and the sky had gone fully dark, Holt came and stood beside her at the railing. Not close enough to be a statement, close enough to be a choice. She did not move away. The plains stretched out before them, dark and vast, the stars coming up thick above the flat horizon. The rain she had been smelling all evening was still moving in from the northwest, the air dense with it, pressing the warmth of the porch light into a tighter circle around them. He said, after a while, "The mare is walking clean." "I know," she said. "I checked her this morning." A pause. "The flour came in from Harrow. I ordered extra. For the winter." Another pause. She could feel him looking at her profile. Nora. The third time. Said the way a man says a thing he has chosen with his whole self, the way a door opens that has been locked from the inside for a very long time. She turned. He raised his hand, and this time he did not lower it. He placed it at the side of her face, the calloused warmth of his palm against her cold cheek, and looked at her with the eyes she had spent 2 weeks learning to read. She covered his hand with her own and held it there. The plains were dark and wide and silent. The lantern in the barn burned its patient gold. The rain came and the first drops touched the porch rail, and the smell of wet earth rose up from the yard, clean and real. She leaned her head into his hand and closed her eyes. The rain came down. The lantern held. The porch held them both. Chosen. Fully. Without hesitation and without reservation. She came to that ranch with an empty pocket and a full mind, and he had asked her the smallest question he could think of, and her answer had changed everything. He had forgotten, somewhere in all those years of holding on alone, that there is a difference between endurance and a life. Tell me, would you have answered him the way she did or held something back? Leave your answer below.